Got exactly 11 minutes before that battery dies. Those were the words the respiratory monitor spit out in a cold digital beep while my father's ICU room faded into darkness around me. The smell of hot plastic and ozone hit my nose before I even understood what had happened. 1 second, the oxygen concentrator was humming steady beside Dad's bed, casting that soft blue glow across the room. And the next second, everything snapped silent except for the piercing alarm screaming from the backup unit under his bed. Red emergency lights flashed across the walls of my living room like police sirens trapped underwater. My father's chest rose slow and uneven beneath the blanket while the battery indicator dropped from 12% to 11%. Outside my front window, standing under the yellow glow of the neighborhood street lamp, Brenda Holloway folded her arms across her beige HOA windbreaker and smiled like she'd just won something. You ever see someone look proud while shutting off power to a house with a medical ICU inside it? That smile still burns in my head. Willow Creek Estates looked peaceful at night, if you didn't know better. Perfect trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, expensive SUVs lined up like showroom displays under soft porch lights. The kind of upscale Texas subdivision where people complained if your garbage can sat visible for more than 20 minutes after pickup. But behind all those polished front doors lived people who cared more about property values than actual human beings. Especially Brenda. Brenda treated this neighborhood like her own private kingdom. 54 years old. Frosted blonde hair sprayed stiff enough to survive a hurricane. White Lexus SUV with HOA president vanity plates parked permanently in front of the clubhouse like some kind of suburban police cruiser. She walked around carrying violation notices the way cops carried tickets. And for 6 straight months, she'd made my life hell because my father's ICU setup offended her sense of neighborhood beauty. According to Brenda, the backup transfer switch mounted beside my garage looked industrial. The oxygen delivery vans arriving twice a week lowered curb appeal. The low diesel rumble from my emergency generator tests sounded disruptive. She called my house a hospital eyesore during one HOA meeting while sipping white wine from a plastic cup with gold initials printed on the side. I remember the exact smell in that room too. Cheap vanilla candles mixed with expensive perfume and fresh printed paperwork. She smiled while saying it. That was the part that stuck with me. My father, Robert Walker, had suffered a massive stroke 14 months earlier. After 3 surgeries and weeks inside a Dallas ICU, I brought him home because hospitals keep people alive, but home gives them a reason to keep fighting. So I converted my downstairs office into a fully permitted critical care room. Backup oxygen, medical-grade battery systems, emergency monitoring equipment. Every inch approved by county inspectors and registered with the utility company as a protected medical residence. Brenda knew all of that. She just didn't care. The alarm screamed again. 10% battery left. Dad's oxygen monitor flickered weakly beside the bed while sweat rolled down my back under the stale summer heat settling into the room. Then I heard it. Low at first, barely noticeable beneath the alarms. The deep, distant growl of diesel engines rolling toward our street. The sound of those diesel engines rolling closer through Willow Creek Estates should have comforted me, but at that moment all I could focus on was my father's breathing. Thin, uneven, mechanical. The backup oxygen concentrator clicked every few seconds like an old car struggling to turn over in freezing weather. 9% battery left glowed red across the monitor mounted beside his bed. The room smelled wrong without the air conditioning running. Hot electronics, stale air. The faint chemical scent of medical tubing warming under the Texas heat. Sweat rolled down my neck while I adjusted Dad's oxygen mask with hands that suddenly felt too big and clumsy. Robert Walker used to build transmission lines across 3 states before arthritis bent his hands into stiff knots. Growing up, I watched him climb steel towers in 100-degree weather with a wrench hanging from his belt and dust coating his work boots. My father believed electricity was more than power. He used to tell me every neighborhood in America was only one broken transformer away from chaos. Funny thing is, he was right. I learned that lesson the hard way after Hurricane Harvey wiped out entire hospital grids along the Gulf Coast. Back then, I was just another exhausted infrastructure engineer, sleeping inside utility trucks and rebuilding emergency systems under floodlights while helicopters circled overhead. 20-hour shifts. Diesel fumes trapped in humid air. Constant hum of portable generators vibrating through wet pavement. You learn real fast during disasters that electricity is not a luxury. It is survival. That was why I built the ICU room after Dad's stroke. Not because doctors told me to, because I knew exactly how fragile systems became when people stopped respecting them. Every cable in that room mattered. Every battery backup. Every emergency relay switch. I installed the transfer panel myself 3 weeks after bringing him home from Dallas Memorial. County inspectors signed off on every inch of it. The utility company classified our address as critical medical priority status. Under state law, protected residences were supposed to receive emergency response before almost anyone else during outages. Brenda Holloway hated that designation the second she found out about it. She started small at first. Passive-aggressive emails about ambulance noise. HOA letters complaining about the reflective emergency marker posted beside my driveway. One violation notice claimed the silver oxygen tanks visible through my garage window created visual clutter inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Another accused me of operating unauthorized commercial equipment because a backup generator trailer sat parked beside my fence during maintenance week. I still remember standing inside the Willow Creek clubhouse while Brenda read those complaints aloud in front of 30 neighbors drinking boxed wine and pretending not to stare at me. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed softly above her perfectly styled blonde hair while she smiled that polished suburban smile. "We all have hardships, Ethan," she said, tapping her acrylic nails against a clipboard. "But no homeowner gets special treatment." Sentence spread through the neighborhood like gospel after that meeting. Suddenly neighbors who used to wave stopped making eye contact. Parents pulled their kids away from my driveway when medical supply vans showed up. One couple even filed a noise complaint because Dad's overnight monitor alarm beeped during a thunderstorm power fluctuation. But the strange thing was Brenda never yelled, never openly threatened me. People like her never do. They weaponize paperwork instead. They smile while they slowly tighten the screws. Percent battery left flashed across the monitor. Outside my front window, amber lights reflected across the dark houses lining our street. The diesel engines were close now. Close enough to shake the glass. The first truck turned onto Willow Creek Drive slow enough to make every porch light flicker across its chrome grille. Big white utility rig. Amber strobes spinning through the darkness like rotating fire. Then came the second truck behind it. Then a third. The deep growl of diesel engines rolled across the neighborhood, so hard I could feel the vibration through the hardwood floor beneath my boots. Outside, curtains started moving all over the street. Front doors cracked open. People stepped onto porches wearing pajama pants in confusion while the convoy crawled toward my house like a mobile power plant. Brenda's confident little smile disappeared the second she saw the company logos on the side of those trucks. Texas Emergency Infrastructure Authority. She actually took one step backward away from the utility box beside my driveway. I noticed because until that moment, she had been standing there like a queen inspecting conquered territory. 7% battery left blinked beside my father's bed. Dad's oxygen monitor let out another sharp warning tone while his fingers twitched weakly against the blanket. I leaned closer and adjusted the nasal tubing beneath his nose. His skin looked pale under the emergency backup lights. Thin blue veins visible beneath paper-like skin. My father used to look indestructible. 6'3", broad shoulders, forearms thick from 40 years climbing steel utility towers. Now he looked fragile enough to disappear beneath hospital sheets. Changes a man. Watching someone who once carried entire power grids on his back struggle just to breathe changes something inside you permanently. Outside, truck doors slammed one after another. Heavy boots hit pavement. Radios crackled through the humid night air. The smell of diesel exhaust drifted through my partially open front door while bright portable floodlights snapped on across the street, turning Willow Creek Estates from luxury suburb into disaster response zone in less than 30 seconds. Brenda hurried toward the lead truck, waving both hands like she still thought she controlled the situation. I could not hear every word from inside the house, but I heard enough. Handled. Like cutting power to a protected ICU residence at 2 in the morning was some routine maintenance inconvenience. What Brenda did not understand was that emergency systems leave trails. Every outage, every relay interruption, every unauthorized disconnect signal. Utility infrastructure records everything automatically. That was the funny thing about power systems. They tell the truth even when people do not. I walked to my kitchen counter and picked up the tablet still displaying the outage diagnostics I pulled 5 minutes earlier. Green glowed blue against my hands. Manual disconnect event. Not storm-related. Not transformer failure. Someone physically shut down the isolated feed to my property from the neighborhood utility junction box. A box only certified maintenance personnel were supposed to access. Another alarm shrieked from Dad's monitor. 6% battery left. Outside, more lights flooded the street. Neighbors gathered at the edge of their driveways, whispering nervously while utility workers unloaded thick black power cables from the trucks. Brenda's white Lexus sat parked under the floodlights, looking almost gray now, stripped of all that polished suburban perfection. Then one of the utility supervisors turned and looked directly toward my house. The second he saw me standing in the doorway, his entire posture changed. He pulled off his hard hat immediately. "Mr. Walker," he called across the street, loud enough for every neighbor to hear. "State emergency crews are now on site and taking command of the grid." The entire street went quiet after the supervisor said my name. Not normal quiet either. The kind of silence where people suddenly realize they have been standing on the wrong side of something serious. Even the portable generators seemed louder after that. Their diesel engines rumbled low and steady while thick black cables snaked across manicured lawns that had probably never seen real utility equipment before. Brenda's face tightened immediately. Her smile disappeared so fast it looked painful. "Taking command?" she repeated sharply. "This neighborhood is under private HOA authority." The supervisor barely looked at her. He motioned toward 2 linemen already unlocking the secondary utility cabinet near the sidewalk. "Medical emergency, override supersedes HOA jurisdiction, ma'am." I could practically hear the neighbors processing those words in real time. Override, jurisdiction, emergency response. Those are not words people expect to hear on a peaceful suburban cul-de-sac at 2:30 in the morning. Dad's monitor beeped again behind me. 5% battery left. I walked back to the ICU room and checked the oxygen pressure manually while the emergency lights flickered against the walls. The room felt hotter now. Thick, humid air clung to my skin, and the backup battery fans whined harder under the strain. Dad's eyes opened slightly when I adjusted the blanket near his shoulder. Cloudy blue eyes. Tired, but aware enough to know something bad was happening. "Power," he whispered weakly. His voice sounded dry and thin, like paper rubbing together. "Working on it," I told him. That answer felt strange coming out of my mouth, because fixing power was usually my job long before emergencies reached this point. 20 years in infrastructure teaches you patterns. Systems fail for reasons. Most outages happen because of storms, overloaded transformers, bad underground feeds, squirrels getting fried in substations. Human sabotage feels different. Cleaner. Intentional. The second I saw the outage diagnostics earlier, I already knew this was no accident. Brenda just did not realize how catastrophic her timing really was. 3 months before all this happened, Texas passed new emergency infrastructure protections after several lawsuits involving medically dependent residents losing utility access during heat waves. Every protected residence got flagged directly inside the state monitoring system. Any manual disconnect automatically triggered an escalation review if backup systems activated. Most people never hear about laws like that because they assume basic human decency keeps things from reaching that point. People like Brenda are exactly why those laws exist. Outside, another truck rolled onto the street carrying a trailer-mounted emergency generator the size of a small bus. Bright orange hazard lights flashed across every house on Willow Creek Drive. The smell of hot diesel drifted through the neighborhood, while utility workers unloaded thick rubber grounding mats onto the pavement directly in front of Brenda's Lexus. That part almost felt poetic. Brenda marched after the crew leader in stiff, angry steps. Her clipboard still clutched against her chest like some kind of suburban riot shield. "You cannot park industrial equipment here," she snapped. "This violates multiple HOA covenants." One of the linemen actually laughed under his breath while tightening a cable connector. Sparks flickered blue for half a second near the transfer switch mounted beside my garage. Then the floodlights got even brighter. Across the street, neighbors started quietly backing away from Brenda one by one. Funny how fast loyalty disappears when official trucks show up with government seals on the doors. Then I heard the sentence that finally drained the color from Brenda's face completely. One of the utility investigators stepped away from the junction box, holding a flashlight and a tablet. "Supervisor," he called loudly. The disconnect was manual. Somebody physically bypassed the protected service lockout. Brenda opened her mouth immediately after the investigator said the disconnect was manual, but no sound came out for a second. You could actually see her brain scrambling for a new version of reality, fast enough to stay ahead of the facts piling up around her. The floodlights painted everything in harsh white glare now. Perfect green lawns looked gray and washed out under utility lighting. Shadows from thick power cables stretched across the pavement like black veins running through the neighborhood. 5 different utility workers stood around the open junction cabinet, while one investigator photographed the cut tamper seal hanging loose from the access latch. The tiny silver security tag swung gently in the warm night wind. Brenda finally found her voice. "I requested emergency maintenance because of unauthorized equipment," she snapped. "This entire property has been violating HOA standards for months." The investigator did not even look up from his tablet. "Did you personally authorize access to a protected medical service cabinet?" Inside the house, Dad's oxygen monitor shrieked again. "4% battery left." That sound cut through every conversation outside instantly. High-pitched, mechanical, urgent. One of the emergency crew supervisors looked directly toward my front window. "Move now," he barked to his team. Suddenly, the entire street exploded into motion. Heavy boots slammed pavement. Utility workers dragged thick feeder cables across the cul-de-sac, while another crew positioned the trailer generator beside my driveway. Diesel exhaust rolled through the humid air in hot, choking waves. The generator engine revved higher, deep enough to vibrate the windows inside the house. I stepped back into the ICU room and manually checked Dad's pulse oximeter again. 87% and dropping slowly. His breathing sounded shallow beneath the oxygen mask. Weak, rattling breaths mixed with the steady clicking of battery relays switching load priority inside the backup system cabinet mounted against the wall. Sweat soaked through the back of my shirt now. The room felt like it was shrinking around me. There is something terrifying about watching countdown numbers beside someone you love. Battery percentages become life expectancy. Every beep sounds louder than the last one. Every second stretches too long. Outside, metal clanged against metal while crews connected the mobile transfer system directly into my emergency panel. Bright sparks flashed briefly near the cable junctions before stabilizing into a low electrical hum. The smell hit me next. Hot rubber insulation, diesel fuel, warm transformer oil. It smelled exactly like hurricane response operations along the Gulf Coast. Controlled chaos, professional urgency, systems fighting against failure in real time. Brenda kept trying to talk over everyone. "This is completely excessive," she shouted. "I never authorized industrial generators in this neighborhood." One of the older linemen finally stopped working long enough to stare at her over his safety glasses. "Lady," he said calmly, "you shut off power to a registered ICU residence during a Texas summer." The sentence landed hard, real hard, because suddenly this was no longer about HOA rules or landscaping complaints or ugly equipment. The entire neighborhood finally saw the situation for what it really was. My father's monitor flashed red again. 3% battery left. Then the portable generator outside roared louder than before. A sharp mechanical clunk echoed through the house as the transfer switch engaged. The second that transfer switch engaged, the entire ICU room came back to life all at once. Conditioning vents hissed overhead. The oxygen concentrator surged into full power with its familiar low mechanical hum. Monitor screens flashed blue and green across the dark room, while the harsh red emergency lights finally disappeared from the walls. Dad's oxygen levels climbed almost immediately. 88, 90, 92. I stood there for a second with one hand against the edge of the hospital bed, just listening to the sound of stable electricity flowing through the room again. Most people never think about electricity until it disappears. But when your father needs machines to breathe safely through the night, power becomes something you feel in your bones. Outside, the portable generator kept rumbling steady enough to shake the windows lightly. Floodlights flooded the cul-de-sac in hard white glare, while utility crews moved with the kind of focused efficiency that only comes from people trained to handle disasters. Neighbors lined both sidewalks, now watching everything unfold in stunned silence. Willow Creek Estates had probably never seen this much real infrastructure activity in its entire polished little history. Brenda, meanwhile, looked like someone had dropped her into the wrong movie. Her perfect HOA composure cracked more every minute. "This is harassment," she snapped toward the investigators. I requested a code compliance inspection. The older investigator finally turned fully toward her for the first time. Mid-50s maybe, sunburned neck, reflective utility vest stained with old grease marks. The kind of guy who spent his entire life around substations and storm recovery sites. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "code compliance inspectors do not manually disconnect protected ICU service feeds." The sentence hit the street harder than the generators did. People started whispering immediately after that. I saw one neighbor quietly pull her phone out and start recording from her driveway. Another couple backed slowly toward their front porch like they suddenly did not want to be associated with Brenda anymore. Funny how suburban loyalty works. Everybody loves the HOA president until official investigators start using words like protected medical service and manual disconnect violations. Brenda tried pivoting fast. I was told the residence was operating unauthorized commercial equipment. I stepped outside then for the first time since the power failed. Warm, humid air wrapped around me, immediately carrying the heavy smell of diesel exhaust and hot transformer cables. The entire street vibrated softly beneath my boots from the generator trailer parked beside my driveway. One of the utility supervisors nodded respectfully when he saw me approach. "Mr. Walker," he said, "temporary emergency power is stable. Full forensic review of the service interruption is underway." Brenda's expression changed instantly when he called me Mr. Walker again. Not neighbor, not homeowner, Mr. Walker. Respect matters in moments like that, especially to people obsessed with status. She looked at me differently now, less confident, more cautious, like she was finally realizing she had badly misunderstood who she had been pushing around for 6 straight months. The thing Brenda never bothered learning about me was that I did not just work around power systems. I helped design emergency response compliance protocols after the Gulf Coast hospital failures. My entire career existed because disasters expose weak people pretending to have authority. I spent years rebuilding electrical infrastructure after hurricanes, tornado outbreaks, and grid collapses across 3 states. Hospitals, emergency shelters, medical campuses. Disaster zones teach you very quickly that rules only matter if they protect human beings first. Everything else is paperwork. One of the younger investigators walked toward the supervisor holding a tablet. "We confirmed override tampering from the neighborhood utility cabinet," he said loudly enough for the whole street to hear. "Access logs show an unauthorized maintenance request submitted through HOA channels at 11:42 tonight." Brenda's face lost what little color it still had left. Then the investigator added the sentence that changed the entire atmosphere of the street instantly. The request originated directly from Brenda Holloway's HOA administrator account. You could actually hear the entire neighborhood inhale at the same time after the investigator said Brenda's name out loud. Not gasps, just that strange collective silence people make when something suddenly becomes real. Brenda stood frozen beside the open utility cabinet while amber warning lights flashed across her face in slow rotating patterns. The clipboard she carried everywhere slipped slightly in her hands. For the first time since I moved into Willow Creek Estates, she looked small. The investigator continued scrolling through the access records on his tablet while the portable generator behind him thundered steadily against the curb. Administrator override authorization submitted at 11:42 p.m., he repeated calmly. Manual disconnect completed at 12:14 a.m. Protected medical residence alert triggered immediately after service interruption. Brenda tried recovering fast. "I did not disconnect anything myself," she snapped. "I filed a complaint because of dangerous, unauthorized modifications." The older supervisor looked up from the transfer panel near my garage. "Every modification on this property is state permitted and medically certified." His voice carried across the entire cul-de-sac, including the ICU infrastructure. That word changed everything. ICU. Suddenly, this was not just some neighborhood dispute anymore. People standing barefoot on their driveways in pajama pants started looking at my house differently. Not as the weird medical property Brenda spent months complaining about. They saw it for what it actually was. A home keeping an old man alive. Funny how perspective changes once official floodlights and government trucks show up in the middle of the night. One of the younger utility workers approached, carrying the cut security seal inside a clear evidence bag. Tiny piece of metal, barely bigger than a keychain. But that little broken seal carried more weight than every HOA violation Brenda ever mailed me. Federal compliance will want photographs uploaded immediately, he told the investigator. Brenda's eyes widened at the word federal. There it was. The moment the situation finally caught up with her. I had seen that exact expression before after storm failures and infrastructure lawsuits. People always think power belongs to whoever makes the loudest demands until actual authorities arrive carrying paperwork with state seals on it. Brenda spent years acting untouchable because she controlled mailbox colors and landscaping fines. But real infrastructure authority works differently. It does not shout. It documents. It logs timestamps. It records access codes. It leaves evidence trails. The portable generator surged slightly as load demand stabilized through the transfer system. Warm air blasted from my restored air conditioning vents inside the house, while floodlights reflected off every polished SUV parked along the street. Willow Creek Estates suddenly looked less like a luxury subdivision and more like an active emergency response site. The atmosphere changed instantly again. Even the crews seemed to straighten up slightly when the vehicle stopped beside the generator trailer. A tall woman stepped out wearing a navy field jacket with Texas infrastructure compliance stitched across the chest. She scanned the street once before locking eyes on me immediately. "Ethan Walker?" she called. "That is me." She nodded once. "Professional. Focused. We received your emergency escalation packet 31 minutes ago." Brenda whipped around toward me so fast her blonde hair shifted in the floodlights. Confusion spread across her face first, then realization. Slow, heavy, ugly realization. Because she finally understood something she should have figured out months ago. I was never just some exhausted guy quietly taking HOA fines while caring for his father. I was the person state emergency teams called when critical infrastructure failures turned into legal disasters. Brenda stared at me like she was seeing an entirely different person standing in my driveway. The floodlights reflected off her frozen expression while the generator behind us continued its deep, steady rumble through the street. That sound had become the heartbeat of the neighborhood now. Every few seconds the engine throttled slightly under load, sending vibrations through the pavement beneath everyone's feet. Funny thing about emergency infrastructure. Once it arrives, it takes control of everything around it. The woman from Texas Infrastructure Compliance walked toward the open utility cabinet while another investigator handed her the evidence bag containing the broken tamper seal. She studied it for maybe 3 seconds before looking directly at Brenda. "You authorized a manual disconnect against a registered critical medical address during an active heat advisory." Brenda immediately shook her head. "I was filing a property standards complaint." At 11:42 at night, the investigator asked calmly. Brenda opened her mouth again, but nothing useful came out this time. The neighbors watching from their driveways looked uncomfortable now. Not annoyed, not entertained, uncomfortable. Because everyone in Willow Creek Estates suddenly realized how close this situation came to turning into something far worse. One of the older couples down the street quietly walked over carrying bottled water for the utility crews. Another neighbor pulled her young daughter back inside after hearing the words critical medical address repeated over the radios. The illusion of perfect suburban control had cracked wide open tonight. And underneath it was just fear, paperwork, and people pretending they understood systems they had no business touching. Inside the house, Dad was finally sleeping again. His oxygen levels stabilized at 94% after full generator power restored the ICU circuits. I stood in the doorway for a moment watching the soft blue monitor lights reflect across his face. The room sounded normal again. Oxygen concentrator humming steady, air vents whispering overhead, heart monitor beeping in calm, predictable rhythm. Those sounds hit differently after silence. You appreciate ordinary things more after hearing machines struggle to stay alive on backup batteries. Outside, the investigation kept growing. Another state vehicle arrived. Then a county utility compliance truck. Radios crackled nonstop while investigators photographed the cabinet, the override records, and the disconnected service lock. Brenda stayed planted beside the curb, looking smaller every minute under all those floodlights. The woman who spent years measuring grass height with a ruler now stood surrounded by actual infrastructure authorities carrying evidence bags and compliance tablets. The contrast would have been funny if it was not so pathetic. Then came the moment that finally broke the neighborhood completely. One of the state inspectors reviewed the emergency override records and frowned. "Supervisor," he called out, "there is another issue." The street quieted instantly again except for the growl of the generators. The HOA administrator override also interrupted service balancing for 3 adjacent properties. He rotated the tablet screen toward the others. Unauthorized rerouting caused overload spikes across the west cul-de-sac feed. The older supervisor rubbed his forehead slowly. "You are telling me she tampered with a live residential distribution branch?" "That way." Brenda's face drained white under the floodlights. "I did not know any of that," she whispered. That was probably the first honest sentence she said all night. Because people like Brenda never think beyond control. They see systems as tools to punish people they dislike. They never stop to understand how fragile infrastructure actually is. The woman from Texas Compliance finally stepped closer to Brenda with a flat professional expression. "Ma'am, effective immediately, this entire street is being placed under emergency grid protection review." She pointed toward the massive generator trailer parked directly beside Brenda's Lexus. "And until our investigation is complete, temporary mobile infrastructure operations will remain active on this roadway." Brenda slowly turned toward the generator truck sitting in front of her house. Thick black feeder cables stretched across her precious HOA-approved landscaping, while diesel exhaust drifted through the night air. The same equipment she spent months calling ugly and disruptive was now officially taking over her entire street. By sunrise, Willow Creek Estates no longer looked like the polished luxury neighborhood from the real estate brochures. Thick utility cables still stretched across the cul-de-sac. Portable floodlights cast pale white glare over manicured lawns littered with muddy boot prints and orange safety cones. The generator trailer continued its deep, steady rumble beside Brenda's Lexus, pumping emergency power into my father's ICU room while diesel fumes drifted through the morning air. The whole street smelled like hot machinery and wet pavement instead of fresh-cut grass and overpriced landscaping. Honestly, it looked more honest that way. Dad slept through most of the night once the system stabilized. Around 5:30 in the morning, I sat beside his bed listening to the soft rhythm of the oxygen concentrator while sunlight slowly crept through the blinds. The room finally felt calm again. Warm air moved steadily from the vents. Monitor screens glowed stable blue and green instead of flashing red panic warnings. My father opened his eyes once and looked toward the window where the distant amber utility lights still flickered outside. "Storm," he whispered weakly. I almost laughed. Something like that. He nodded slightly and drifted back to sleep. That was the thing about men like my father. He spent 40 years repairing damaged infrastructure across Texas. Long nights, emergency outages, hurricane recovery sites. He understood better than most people that real power is not loud. It is dependable. It shows up when people need it most. Outside, the investigation had only gotten bigger overnight. State compliance teams stayed on site until dawn, documenting every service record connected to the unauthorized disconnect. The utility cabinet remained sealed under temporary evidence tags while county investigators reviewed HOA communications and override requests. At some point during the night, someone from the HOA board quietly removed Brenda's reserved parking sign from the clubhouse entrance. Nobody announced it. Nobody argued. The sign was just gone by morning. Funny how quickly suburban kingdoms collapse once paperwork turns against them. Around 7 o'clock, several neighbors approached my driveway carrying coffee and bottled water for the utility crews. The same people who spent months avoiding eye contact suddenly wanted to apologize for not realizing how serious things were. One older man admitted Brenda had pressured residents repeatedly about hospitalizing the neighborhood image. Another neighbor quietly told me she had received HOA warnings just for letting visiting nurses park outside too long during her husband's chemotherapy treatments last year. That hit me harder than I expected, because suddenly I realized this was never just about me or my father. Brenda built an entire culture around punishing vulnerability. Anybody sick, elderly, different, inconvenient. She treated compassion like a property value threat. Around 8:15, a tow truck finally arrived for Brenda's Lexus. Not because of anything dramatic. The emergency crews simply needed additional clearance space around the generator operations zone. The irony almost felt too perfect to be real. I watched Brenda stand silently beside the sidewalk while her precious white SUV got relocated 3 blocks away outside the emergency perimeter. No yelling this time. No clipboard. No speeches about HOA authority. Just silence. The same kind of silence my ICU room fell into when she shut the power off hours earlier. By mid-morning, state crews finished stabilizing permanent service restoration to my house. The lead supervisor shook my hand before leaving. "Your father should remain on protected priority monitoring permanently after this," he said. "Additional safeguards are already being added to the grid records." I thanked him while the generator behind us slowly powered down for the first time all night. The sudden quiet felt strange after hours of constant engine noise vibrating through the neighborhood. Brenda stood at the far end of the street watching the crews leave beneath the harsh Texas sunlight. Exhausted, pale, completely alone. And for the first time since moving into Willow Creek Estates, I realized something important. People like Brenda think power comes from controlling others, finding them, silencing them, threatening them with rules. But real power sounds different. It sounds like oxygen machines humming steadily at sunrise while your father keeps breathing.